Welcome everyone, wherever you may be. This webinar is all about teacher training. And we have two extraordinary masters, Blanche Podhajski and Nancy Mather, who you'll be spending a few hours with, a remarkable pair and a remarkable opportunity to learn. We also hope you enjoy yourselves. Thank you.
Please note there will be a Q&A at the end. If you wish to submit questions, you can do so through Zoom's Q&A feature.
Yes, I'd like to introduce Blanche Podhajski. She's a Ph.D. Dr. Blanche Podhajski is founder, president emeritus of the Stern Center for Language and Learning, a nonprofit learning center dedicated to learning for all. For nearly 40 years, the Stern Center has been providing literacy services for children and adults, professional development opportunities for educators, and research on proven literacy practices. She received her PhD from Northwestern University in communication disorders, specializing in learning disabilities. She holds a certificate for clinical competence in speech pathology from the American Speech Language Hearing Association and was awarded the champion for Children's Medal of Honor by the Turrell Fund. She served as the clinical associate professor of the neurological sciences at the University of Vermont College of Medicine and as a clinical associate professor in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders. Blanche co-authored Sounds Abound program, teaching phonological awareness in the classroom. She created Time for Teachers, which brings current research-proven reading interventions to classroom teachers. She is the lead author of the Comprehensive Reading Course for Educators, a robust 3-credit online course produced by MINDPLAY. And she developed Building Blocks for Literacy, a robust course for early childhood educators. Welcome, Blanche.
Thank you, Sinclair. What a delight it is to be with all of you and to follow Sinclair Sherrill, who has been such an extraordinary advocate for teacher education and for helping all children learn to read. This webinar is also a joy for me because I'm doing it in partnership with Dr. Mather, Nancy, and I. This is our 25th anniversary, Nancy. We've been doing this now enough years to have a silver jubilee. And it's been a remarkable journey in terms of where the research has taken us. And that's our job today, is to present to you the research that's accumulated now for over 30 years on phonology and orthography. And it's not like we're trying to divorce a happily married couple of concepts, because these two are very interdependent. But it is important for us, I think, as professionals to be able to understand how each contribute in their own very sophisticated way to children's reading and spelling development. So I have to put my PowerPoint here up. And we're going to be doing the ears and the eyes of it today, the ears through phonology. But as you also learn, it's going to also be a lot about the use of our articulators as well as our ears. But phonology is such an important element in the development of reading and spelling. And, you know, prior to 1980, people in education weren't even considering the oral language component of what was perceived as a very visual act, reading. And until we began to think of reading more as a language activity that incorporates both spoken and written forms, that we became attuned to what research in the science of reading instruction now tells us is critical for children to know and for us as teachers, for us to teach them. We're having just a little mechanical difficulty. Okay, so just as a preamble here, let's just review. I know this is probably well known to all of you, but when we talk about the science of reading instruction, we're really talking about this body of knowledge that has been really for years in the making to debunk old methods, sort of just experiential methods based on tradition and observation, and not on the real scientific proof. So when we look at the science of reading instruction, we're looking at deficits within children who have reading difficulties in the phonological component of language. And that's a disproportionate kind of a skill to what they demonstrate in terms of their intellectual prowess, their speaking abilities, many times their artistic abilities. But we can also be seeing, in addition to this difficulty, quote, cracking the code of reading, problems with reading comprehension and secondary reading experience differences that can impact vocabulary and background knowledge. So let's do some definitions of terms here. Phonology is merely the study of sounds in a language. And phonological awareness, which has again been the buzz of our profession for the last 40 years, is the ability to work with rhymes, words, syllables, and onset rhyme patterns, but including phonemic awareness above all. I was telling my husband, I said, what's a good word for describing the most important element of a group of concepts? I said, you know, the big kahuna, the most critical dimension. He said, why don't you just say most important? And that's exactly what it is. It is just phonemic awareness is the most important subset of phonological awareness. It's the ability to hear, to be able to identify, discriminate, and manipulate the sounds and words. And lastly, we talk about phonics, and phonics is what we're now, again, advocating as the preferred intervention, the preferred instruction in regular classrooms, as well as for struggling readers, because it links letters to phonemes, syllables, and words. Phonology is important because we need to understand phonemes in order to provide students with constructive feedback regarding their own pronunciation and spelling products. So when I was an evaluator many years ago, and I was looking at children who were coming in to the Stern Center because they had problems learning how to read, or their written language was difficult to decipher. And we did some screens for their spoken language abilities. At that time, the only screen we had was probably the Lindemood auditory conceptualization test. And that had a discrimination piece, but then it had a manipulation piece where children had to rotate sounds. And these were the kinds of children that would say effluent for elephant, and they'd have problems with the sequencing and with the construction of language that other children just came on to automatically. A wonderful review of the research on phonemic awareness and print alphabetics, as well as on implications for instruction and a review of phonics programs, is Susan Brady's article from 2020, which was published through the Reading League on their website. And the link is here if you want to look at it. It really is, since the National Reading Panel report of 2000 and Louisa Motz's work in speech to print, this is, I think, perhaps one of your best and most comprehensive reviews of where we have come in terms of our understanding of sound and letter knowledge and their critical intersection and what that means for instruction. So let's look at the big umbrella for phonological awareness, which is the overarching awareness of sounds across rhymes, across syllables, and across sounds. If we start with rhyme, we know that children in the preschool years in particular are having a wonderful time recognizing rhyme. Does lamb rhyme with Sam? Sam, you've got a rhyming word with your name. Do they recognize that rhyme? Can they then complete other rhymes if you say, what rhymes with Bill? Phil, that's right, Phil rhymes with Bill. And then can they generate rhymes on their own? And a lot of children will get really into this, and it's fun to watch. It's fun to watch as they discover that there is a way to manipulate words so that they rhyme. And for those of us in the profession, we say, well, a word or a syllable can be divided into an onset and a rhyme. And the onset is everything that comes before the vowel or the vowel combination. Okay, so in the word sit, the onset would be s, the rhyme is it. So then when we want to rhyme something with sit, we manipulate the onset. Fit, bit, and a blend like it, that's pretty sophisticated. But what we're doing is just manipulating word parts for rhyme, the onset and the rhyme. Let's look at the next part under the umbrella, syllable awareness. Syllable awareness is another good pre-kindergarten activity for counting syllables, for blending syllables, for segmenting and deleting syllables. And there are so many wonderful words in young children's vocabularies, cupcake, hot dog, baseball, that lend themselves well to syllable awareness activities, that it's a good opportunity for us to do some pre-phonemic awareness. But recently, we've been learning that this does not have to be a developmental progression. You don't have to go from rhyme to syllable to phoneme. Let's get into the phoneme just as soon as we can, because again, the phoneme and phonemic awareness is what's most important. But at a preschool level, syllable and rhyme activities can be fun. So remember, it's just syllables that can be pronounced, or they're pronounced around a vowel sound. So remembering, there's 4 syllables. And after rhyming, which would be easier for students, and why? Syllable awareness would be easier. And that's why we think about it as a phoneme, a preschool activity. But by the time you get to kindergarten, we have to be thinking very seriously about how we're going to be doing phonemic awareness. So if we were to do activities in syllable awareness, going from easier to harder, we'd blend them, we'd count them, we'd then segment them. How many syllables are in caterpillar? Caterpillar. Okay. And you can use blocks, you can use chips, you can use clapping, you can use jumping. There are many wonderful ways to just have children become more conscious of word parts. We can do deleting syllables. Cowboy. What's cowboy without the boy? A cow. And then manipulating syllables. How do we take parts of syllables and blend them together or change them? So guess my secret word. Baseball, alphabet. How many syllables are in cupcake? And again, we can use blocks. We can use naming. Obviously, using the blocks is going to be easier than coming up with the name. Deleting syllables, say spider. Now say spider, but don't say der. Spy. So now let's focus on phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness, again, has been called like the scientific success story of the 20th century. The fact that we have learned how crucial phonemic awareness is to learning to read and to spell is a wonderful thing, because we had been thinking a lot more about word recognition and sight teaching of reading words in the past. And now we know that phonics, or the segmenting of sounds within words, is probably the most, it unquestionably is the best way to introduce reading instruction to children. So what is phonemic awareness? The understanding that words are made of single speech sounds and phonemes. That's what a single speech sound is, a phoneme that can be discriminated, isolated, and manipulated. So do doll and duck start with the same sound? Duh, duh. Now, what's interesting about sound production and discrimination is that sounds change depending on their positions in words. And that's why when we choose key words for children, doll and duck are good, because they start with the same word and they're followed by vowels immediately. So when I say doll and I say duck, my mouth looks pretty much the same. But if I say doll and I say dress, my mouth had a very different contour. It was much more pursed. My lips were pursed. Doll, dress. That's because dress has a DR blend, and that function of what we call co-articulation, saying sounds together, is changing the production of the duh. Again, when I was a young clinician, the wide range achievement test was very popular. And one of the key words for spelling on the wide range achievement test was dress. And the students that I saw would always spell it JRS. And again, if you're thinking of children using what they know, they're talking, dog, dress, j. It's closer, the d sound in dress is closer to a j sound. So it's a truly logical, again, developmentally appropriate mistake. Isolating sounds, being able to identify what the first sound is in words. The first sound in moose. And again, preschool kids, kindergarten children can do this very nicely. What word do we make from at, blending them together, and then segmenting. Segmenting is a wonderful activity that, again, influences children's acquisition of phonemic awareness. And the sooner we can link sounds to letters, the better. It's not like we have to go all the way through sound segmentation before we introduce letters. We can start doing it right after this activity. You could have letter blocks and put them under the chips. For example, in clock, the k, o, a, k can then be followed by k, o, a, c, k, which is the digraph for an ending k sound. Deleting sounds, say mask. Now say mask without the ask. kids really kind of like this, especially when you can find words that have real words within them. Adding sounds, say eat, eat. Now add f to eat, feet. Substituting sounds, say hard with a t instead of the d. And it becomes heart. It's really quite a discovery and great fun when children can make new words from words that are familiar to them already. Switch the first sounds in tomboy, bomb toy. Is that a real word, bomb toy? No, but it's a fun word, bomb toy. Okay, if I change spot to stop, what did I change? The p and the t. And again, if you have chips, you can do it first with the chips, and then you can do it with the letters, because the children need to be first listening to what they hear and in terms of their phonemic awareness understanding based on the error patterns. Say stop without the t, stop. So when we look at tasks in phonemic awareness, what makes them more or less difficult? Recognition is obviously easier than production. What am I talking about? Map. You tell me the sounds in fish. It's much easier to recognize when somebody else provides the sounds than it is to produce the sounds. But again, that's a developmental progression in terms of activities. Manipulation or naming. Manipulation also, especially using blocks or chips, is going to be easier than saying, what are the sounds in dog? And dog is a really good word because it's an advanced word in terms of sound construction, even though we think of it as one of our basic fight words, dog, because aw is not the same thing as a short A or a short O. It's an aw sound. So that is, again, another real discovery. In our language, we have 15 different ways that vowels can sound. It's not just A, E, I, O, U. So when children become aware of all those distinctions, that's a real discovery. And then what is the type of phonological awareness skill that we're going after? Blending phonemes versus phoneme segmentation. Again, easier to take the sounds and put them together than to look at a word and take it apart, especially depending on sound position. Okay, so let's go through some of these again. Recognition or production? Does Sill rhyme with Phil? It's a recognition. You just say yes or no. But tell me a word that rhymes with Sill. Phil, Bill, will, till, mill. When we do manipulation, again, say bat, change the a to I. If you change the a to I in bat, what's the word? That's harder. Bit. Tell me the sounds in the word bat, b, a, t. So the type of phonological awareness skill in terms of whether we're asking children to blend, whether we're asking them to segment, or we're asking them to delete is really important. And we always want to teach up, test down. So if we're trying to bring children from one level to the next level in terms of our instruction. When a child has a problem, we have to go down a level to make sure they're secure, for example, at a blending level before we ask them to do segmenting. And the position of the sound. You'd always start with words comfortable to children's vocabularies, with sounds that we're targeting that are in the initial position. The sound is B, we have a boy, we have a bed, we have a baby. Okay. If we're looking at the final position, corn on the cob. Okay. If it's in the medial position, baby is a good word, but it's again going to be more challenging for children until they're perceiving those are two different syllables that we can break up into two. And it's bay in the first syllable, B in the second syllable, baby. And then is there a consonant blend? Because the consonant blend will get impacted by the feature of co-articulation and often get swallowed up or change in its production in the mouth. And children are using that kinesthetic feedback of how they're talking to help them produce the letters and the sounds. So we're looking at phonological awareness instruction to follow developmental benchmarks. Some of the activities that we talked about for rhyme and for syllables would be appropriate during preschool, pre-kindergarten. But by the time children are in kindergarten and first grade, we need to be introducing phonemic awareness, and we need to be linking it to letters. We need to attend to confusable features. So when we select the words, we can go from simple to complex in their feature construction and move from the easiest sounds to the most difficult. So here we have the progression, compound words, raincoat to real words in a compound word to syllables, turtle, common vocabulary for preschool children, but not with two words contained within, but with two syllables, turtle. With onset rhymes, easy one-syllable words that the initial phoneme can be separated, k, at, cat, and then blending them. E. What's the word? Me. What's the word? Up. Let's take a deeper dive into consonant and vowel production. What's been interesting is that many teacher training programs don't include this kind of study of sounds in their curricula. And that has been recognized as a real issue because much of this information comes as new learning for teachers as well as for children. I think we've come a long way. I think we've introduced a lot more robust curricula now that does talk about the science of sounds. But if not, I think it's wonderful for us as educators to share with our colleagues the construction of word production. So obviously a consonant's a sound, it's not a vowel, and it's produced by moving our teeth and tongue to block airflow from our mouths. Here's a wonderful, easy way to represent sound pairs that are the same in terms of their place or manner of articulation. If you look at the column on the left, that's the manner of articulation in how the sounds are made. If they're stop sounds, if they're just a burst of air, that's then stopped by the articulators, if they're nasals, where the sound comes through our nose. If they're fricatives or unvoiced sounds, voiced and unvoiced, and glides and liquids. We'll go through all of those. But if you look at the place of articulation across, you'll get a good handle on how we make these sounds. With our lips, one is voiced, one is unvoiced. The B is voiced. You could hear it if you put your fingers on your throat, you'd be able to hear the B. But if you said P, you wouldn't. The same thing with T and D, K and G. But those kinds of errors within those sound pairs are common among young children, because again, they're looking to the place of articulation for guidance in how to translate what they're hearing to what they want to write. It's the speech to print connection. Okay, so let's look at the voiced and unvoiced consonant. There are 8 pairs of them. Their place of articulation is the same, but one is voiced and uses the vocal cords and one does not. So let's look at these words on the left that end in S, and the ones at the right that also end with the letter S, but end with the sound Z. What is it about the words on the right that change the sound of the plural S ending? This is like such an, I love when people who haven't, again, been exposed to this kind of phonology work come to realize this, because the words on the left, all the keyword cap that we're pluralizing ends with an unvoiced sound. So it takes the unvoiced sound of S. But if it ends in a voiced sound, it takes the voiced ending Z. But children need to learn, and we do this, and many of us just did it intuitively, that S is a way we represent a plural, but it can sound one of 2 ways. And the reason that the sound changes is because of the preceding consonant and whether it's voiced or unvoiced. Caps, cabs. You see the flow of the voice? Backs, bags. It just happens. Sheet, sheets. Shed, sheds. Work, works. Word, words. Beep, beeps. Bibs, bibs. Fascinating. Now let's think about vowels. A vowel is made with our mouth open. It's always voiced. It's not like with consonants, some are voiced and some are unvoiced. Vowels are always voiced. They're continuant sounds, which means that our articulators don't stop them like a B and a K and a T. They have different tongue positions in the mouth, and the attention needs to be to where we produce vowel sounds so we can help children accurately identify vowel sounds. There are how many vowel sounds? Many people think A, E, I, O, U, or 5 long, 5 short, but really there are 15 vowel sounds. 3 if you include R combinations like R, R. Okay. And there are 25 alphabet letter sounds. So altogether, we have anywhere, linguists disagree on this, but usually between 40 and 44 sounds. That's a lot. So let's look at a vowel chart. And this is wonderful. And this is in speech to print. If you're familiar with the work of Louisa Moats, this is a wonderful, wonderful reference book. it's called Language Essentials for Teachers. And it really gives us the knowledge that we didn't get in our training, unless you're a very recent graduate. But it takes vowel sounds around the vowel circle, okay? So you'd go E, I, A, I, O, ooh. Did you notice what happened to my mouth? It went from a smiling E to a totally open to a pursed ooh. Watch again. E, I, A, I, O, ooh. It's really quite amazing. And to teach children this is such fun. And it helps them become more aware of the different ways that vowels can sound. And again, on the right hand are the R, or the R combination vowels. Now, right in the middle, I forgot to mention the little blue circle is around the schwa. Schwa is a sound unto itself. It usually sounds like I or It's always in an unstressed syllable in a multisyllabic word. So like in the word benefit, where do you hear the schwa? It's in the second syllable, benefit. It's an sound. In a word like drama, it would be at the end. In the word command, it would be at the beginning, in the first syllable. Command. But any vowel can make a schwa sound. And again, I thank Dr. Mather for the wonderful cartoon that's on the right-hand side. I want to be a vowel. It's never stressed. Now, if there's a schwa sound in a word, children can get confused when they're blending it, because a word like bag becomes g. What is a bag? What is a, or if it's bag, sorry. What is a bag? If you don't clip it, we say clip it, bag, not bag. Do you hear the distinction? Bag, as opposed to bag. So we want to clip it so we don't put that schwa sound onto consonants that should be articulated cleanly. Let's look at some other vowels that could be confused. The O, like in cook. And again, people often ask about English language learners who don't have the O sound in their native language. They need to learn and practice this sound, like in book or would or should. There's a wonderful resource called Core Teaching Reading Sourcebook that was published in 2000 that helps us look at which phonemes are more difficult for English language learners. Again, that was Core Teaching Reading Sourcebook, published in 2000. And again, the oo sound, as in moon or new or fruit or group, is very different, oo, from the sound in cook. But you can appreciate why people who are looking at the representation of this sound in its written form with a double O have a hard time distinguishing those two sounds. So is this the same vowel sound? tube, and cube. And the one disadvantage of a webinar is I can't have you chat back to me. But if you're thinking to yourselves, if you're saying it is, it is. It's a ooh sound. Tube and cube. Now, where you could get confused is that the sound for long U, the letter U, is actually made of two phonemes. It's not just an ooh, and it's not an or an it's y. The name of the letter U is y plus ooh. So it's really two sounds that make up that letter name, but that letter's sound is usually ooh or ooh if it's a long U, if it's a short, if it's a short U. So we'll see words like you standing alone, the letter name with two phonemes. Yeah, ooh. The word use with three letters, but again, that's a silent E making the vowel long. Yeah, ooze. And then the other short double O, ooze, in ooze. Okay, so how many sounds do we hear in these words? And why don't you maybe take a few minutes and think about them to yourself and then write down the number and we can go through them. Okay, so in camp, there's a direct correspondence between the number of letters and the number of sounds. Camp. 4. In the word shoe, you only have 2. Sh and ooh. In the word rich, you have 3. Ch. And in the word pitch, did you say 3 or 4? It's 3. Ch. But studies have shown that adults have a harder time with phoneme segmentation when they've already learned to spell and get influenced by the visual image in their brains of the spelling. So you think that pitch must have a t sound in it, but the TCH is the same as the CH in terms of representing the ch sound. So that's why rich and pitch rhyme. It's not pitch. We don't pitch a ball. Pitch. I can't even say it. It's so hard to say. But pitch, a TCH digraph, a trigraph, says the ch sound just as well as the CH in rich. Bridge. How many sounds in the word bridge? There are 4. B, j. And again, the DGE is the graphemic representation, the letter representation for the phoneme j. In the word mix, we have more sounds than we do letters because the X in English is represented by a k and a s sound. So the word mix is k, s. 4 sounds, 3 letters. Okay. How about a 2-syllable word like college? Four. K, o, ch. And usually that second vowel is going to take a schwa. College becomes like almost like a short I, college, because it's unaccented, unstressed, and takes on the form, unlike a short E. We don't say college. We go to college. We say we go to college. Okay, unaccented schwa. Last one's a little bit tricky too. Yeah, ooh, oh, 4 sounds. Yeah, ooh, oh. It's not a short U or a long U and an eh sound. It's that ooh combination for the digraph. So if we look at the vowel chart, let's also look at diphthongs, and that's in the yellow on the lower left-hand side. Ow and oi are the 2 diphthongs, usually represented by OW and OY when we spell them. So the sound of those 2 is pretty easy to recognize with their letter pattern. So why does this all matter? Well, research has shown the importance of phonemic awareness instruction in helping children's development of reading. There have been multiple studies that have shown that synthetic phonics, particularly, is the preferred way to see change in children, especially in children who struggle. And even though we focus on kindergarten and 1st grade for the introduction of phonics, it's important to keep it going for struggling readers and for those who are getting into more advanced multisyllabic reading and spelling of words. Okay, so the National Reading Panel report in 2000 stated that teaching phonemic awareness to children significantly improves their reading more than instruction that lacks attention to phonemic awareness. So problems that we're going to see with phonology in children's writing or in their reading is difficulty with medial sounds that they might swallow up. For example, in that word camp that we just looked at, instead it had 4 sounds, the might get lost, and they do because the is a nasal sound and it isn't as dramatically articulated for that sensory feedback. Leaving out nasal sounds, jump for jump, is another example, and the confusion of voiced and unvoiced consonant pairs. So again, thanks to Nancy for these lovely samples. Why would a child write dragon? J-R-A-G-N? Because once again, that DR blend is different. It's co-articulated. The D and the R are co-articulated, so the D sound takes on a different formation. Dagon, dragon. The mouth formation is more like a J sound than a D sound. Potato for potato, that's a voiced, unvoiced, B and P are consonant cognates, right? They're both made the same way on the articulators, but one is voiced and one is unvoiced. So again, striving as children do to get it, potato, 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 it becomes potato. Tent is another example of a medial nasal that gets swallowed up, and the sound just gets swallowed up. For bet, a. If you're doing it as a child, a 5-year-old, you're trying to break it up into its parts. Spell the word bet. A. That's what the name immediately comes to their minds, because it's again closer in articulation than e. Okay, and fly, the insertion of the long I, because fly gets inserted. Okay, here's another wonderful one. I went to the zoo. I saw a giraffe, he was eating hay. Okay, so we see the swallowing up of the nasal in want and the A substitution for the E, just like it was in wet and bet. I went to the zoo. I saw a giraffe, the tongue elevation. I saw a giraffe. He is, and again, that's wonderful in the giraffe spelling because it's a 2-syllable word for us. But if you're trying to sound it out, it's J-R-F, right? So the R combination for a vowel, you just have to learn that either it's I-R, A-R, E-R, or O-R. And then he was eating t-d, that's a consonant cognate pair. Eating. It really does sound more like a D when you're emphasizing it in spoken language so robustly. Another wonderful writing sample from our children in Arizona. One time I went to Nogales. Went is a very, again, the nasal gets taken up, the I for time, the A substitution to my cousins. House is beautifully phonemically articulated and produced visually. It's just that as that sight word, it has an E at the end. We played and played. Then the TH blend gets swallowed up. We took consonant cognates. We went up a mountain and we caught butterflies and we put them in a jar. Then me and my cousins went down the mountain and we went to bed. So what you'd want to do with this child is just help him understand which sounds are voiced, which sounds are unvoiced, and where they occur when you segment words. And I'd start with the 1-syllable word. And here's another example. So as we think about what the alphabetic principle really is and why it's so important to children's early reading and spelling abilities, it's understanding that the sounds heard in spoken words are represented by letters and knowing the sound each letter or group of letters can make. And that's the bridge from spoken language to printed language. And I think that is where I end. And I'm hoping you'll have some questions for me during the question and answer segment.
Thank you so much, Blanche, for that. That was wonderful. We're going to have a 10-minute intermission and look forward to having Nancy Mather begin after that. Thanks so much for participating. Welcome back. I would like to introduce Nancy Mather. And I'm going to read her biography here. Dr. Nancy Mather is an associate professor in the Department of Special Education, Rehabilitation, and School Psychology at the University of Arizona in Tucson. She specializes in the area of assessment, reading, writing, and learning disabilities. She received her Ph.D. from the University of Arizona in learning disabilities with minor areas of study in reading and school psychology. She is also interested in adapting special education strategies to help general education teachers accommodate student diversity. She is the co-author of Woodcock-Johnson 3 and conducts research and training in its use. She has presented nationally and internationally on assessment, instruction, and issues that affect service delivery for individuals with learning disabilities. Dr. Mather has written numerous articles and several books. She co-authored Overcoming Underachieving, an action guide for helping your child succeed in school, a book for parents, Learning Disabilities and Challenging Behaviors, a guide to intervention and classroom management, a book for educators, and Woodcock-Johnson 3, Reports, Recommendations, and Strategies, a book to help educators translate assessment results into meaningful instructional plans. She is also a co-author with Dr. Blanche Podhajski of the online course MINDPLAY. Thank you so much, Nancy.
Thank you for being here. It's great to be here. So good afternoon, everyone. And so my topic is going to be orthography. Let's see if I can figure out how to get this up. So, okay, alrighty, share. Great. So Dr. Podhajski was talking quite a bit about the ears, and I really do feel like we've been overlooking the eyes. So I'm going to talk to you about how orthography impacts reading and spelling development. Now, as Dr. Podhajski mentioned, we've been at this. I think this is about 20 years ago, maybe, I'm not sure, but we've been at this for a long time, really dedicating ourselves to helping teachers know more about reading instruction and how to help students who are struggling with reading. So I'm here in Tucson, Arizona, and it's just beginning to become summertime. I'm not sure how you all feel, but this pandemic has kind of made me wonder what day it is sometime. It's kind of cute in Time magazine. They said, we need a new word. It's called Blur's Day. The fuzzy merging time since the pandemic shut down so much of the world, making it difficult to determine what day of the week it is. So I really do prefer talking to an audience. And so I just want to show you, I made my little audience for me here. But, you know, actually, when I look out my window here, I have an audience. I've got my owl friend. So he came and then he invited 2 of his friends. So it has been, I think we've all paid a little more attention to nature the last couple of years, but we get just some, you know, really pretty sunsets here in Arizona. You can't beat them. And I doubt you see signs like this, you know, where you live. So the other day I looked out and there's a bobcat at the swimming pool. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. But then what was funny is he had a bobcat pool party. So when I looked at this, I just had a laugh because I thought, you know, I think they're social distancing. They all are 6 feet apart. Oh, anyway. So just before I start in, I am a co-author of 3 tests I'm briefly going to mention in the talk: Woodcock-Johnson 4, Test of Orthographic Competence 2, and the Test of Silent Word Reading Fluency 2. So I'll just be mentioning those briefly. So we're going to talk about what is orthography, how does poor orthographic processing affect reading and spelling development, what are some standardized tests and formal ways to assess orthographic knowledge, what are some examples of interventions that can help students who have weaknesses in orthography. Now, Ambrose Bierce said, orthography is the science of spelling by the eye instead of the ear. I thought that it's kind of a good definition because, you know, how do you know the correct spelling? So you can use phonological processing to figure out in phonics, rain, rain, soap, soap, but how do you know which one is spelled correctly? So the only way you know is with your eyes, that you've seen the word enough time, you recognize which one is the correct spelling. So I've been thinking about orthography, boy, gosh, I would say about 35 years. Rhea Roberts and I wrote this article back in 1997 about orthographic dyslexia. But one of the good news is people are now starting to talk about orthography and paying attention to orthography. So this was more recently the Scottish Rite Hospital, where they proposed a definition of orthography, orthographic knowledge, and orthographic processing. So orthographic processing, the skill to use orthographic knowledge to read and spell words. So they say it's a subcomponent, not a subtype of developmental dyslexia. I don't know which is really better. They make separable contributions to word recognition and spelling, contributes differently to reading and spelling difficulty, and problems in orthography require different, types of interventions. I really feel like with some of our students with dyslexia, dyslexia is really a disorder at the sublexical level. As Dr. Podhajski mentioned, that it's all intertwined, phonology, orthography, morphology, and many students, you can see examples of errors kind of in all three areas of language. So, what I was wondering about, how could this be a phonological processing problem when you have a student who spells words, exactly the way they sound? So Spence is in 5th grade. And, we look at this fantastic, amazing, colossal, energy efficient, impervious, healthy, glorious. And so he was just brainstorming words, he wanted to use in his paper. But, paradise is a fantastic, amazing, last but not least, a colossal place. And so you look at his spelling, people and paradise, they're impervious to harm. And so this isn't, a problem with sounds. And we look at this sample from Spence, and if you just look at that last line, she called the police because the man behind turned on his high beams again and again, again and again. So here we have a bright 5th grade student who's still reversing B's and D's, who has the word again spelled 4 different ways on 2 lines, who doesn't know because is one word. And the one thing that was kind of cute about Spence was, though, he finally did learn how to spell the police, which you can see right there. And every day, no matter what he wrote, the police came into the story. And he said, I finally know how to spell a word. So he was so excited that everything he wrote included the police. Now, this is a little girl I just saw last week. She's 10 years old. And we look at her spelling from F-R-U-M, water, W-H-O-T-R, wa-at-er, cooked, once. So again, listening to sounds, and you look at writing samples here on the Woodcock-Johnson, the girl is swinging on a swing set. Now you look at girl, G-U-R-L-L. And you think by the time you're in 5th grade, how many times, you've seen that word and still, are unsure how to spell it. You look down at the bottom, the dog is begging to bury his bone, so it's still BD, reversals. And we'll even have some older students. Brian's 16, and you look at his spelling there. I mean, look at suggestion, SOGJESTCH, suggestion. So we have older students still struggling, with orthography. So just looking at some definitions of orthography, essentially it is the system of marks that make up printed language. So it includes letters, numbers, punctuation, marks, capitalization rules. So it really essentially is our writing system. So Dr. Berninger talked about orthographic, the visual repetitions specific to words, so not visual spatial skills, orthographic coding, representing a printed word in memory, accessing the whole letter cluster, word, and an orthographic image, representing a specific word in memory. So there's been several terms used in terms of orthographic images. Some people said visual orthographic images, mental graphemic representations, mental orthographic images. So, kind of all these abbreviations, have been used to talk about orthographic images. So many of our students with dyslexia have unstable word images. How do I spell because? I knew it yesterday. And you'll see that these kids can spell a word right one day, and then the next day they don't remember how to spell it again. So here's just some definitions related to orthography. So orthography, the writing system of a language. Orthographic processing is the brain's ability to recall letter orientation, spelling pattern, words with accuracy and speed. Orthographic knowledge, acquired information stored in memory regarding how spoken language is represented in written language. Orthographic retrieval, recalling the images of individual letters, word parts, and words. So I did include for you in the handout just a recent article from the Reading League Journal that Dr. Lynn Jaffe and I wrote about orthographic knowledge and how it contributes to reading and spelling. And so you'll find that article actually in your handouts if you're interested. So orthographic processing, the quality of the orthographic codes, the speed of accessing that information, and your knowledge of whole word, and also the sub-word units. So differences in print exposure also affect the development of orthographic processing. And orthographic processing explains additional differences, reading and spelling development independent of, phonological processing. Now, if we kind of look through history, similar constellations, have been described. Early on in the century, it was called word blindness, then visual dyslexia, dyseidetic, surface dyslexia. So other terms have been used to describe this difficulty in recalling the images of words. So back in 1896, Pringle Morgan, in describing a 14-year-old boy, said, "He seems to have no power of preserving and storing up the visual impression produced by words. Hence, the words those seen have no significance for him. His visual memory for words is defective or absent, which is equivalent to saying he's what Kuzmal has termed word blind. I may add, the boy is bright and of average intelligence and conversation. The schoolmaster who has taught him for some years said he'd be the smartest lad in the school if the instruction were entirely oral." And I think we've all seen kids like that, where if they didn't have to read and write, they'd be the smartest kids in the school. So here's just kind of a description. I'll just read you quickly of orthographic processing and retrieval, kind of what happens. So orthographic processing is the ability to accurately and rapidly form images of individual letters, spelling patterns, and words. This includes letter form, letter orientation, common letter combinations. When typical young readers sound out a word a few times, they then remember the word as a whole. As skill increases, they notice and store images of frequently seen words and also letter combinations and patterns. When the reader encounters one of these word parts or words again, the word is recognized and its sound and meaning are activated. A person who has a weakness in orthographic processing is less likely to recall the patterns. Thus, no image is created or only a partial image is created. Subsequently, when they see a word or word part, even one seen many times before, it doesn't register as familiar or activate sound and meaning. Consequently, these readers depend more on sounding out words for recognition. They acquire sight words more slowly, and they read less fluently. So orthographic retrieval is the ability to retrieve those images from memory, as in spelling. Once writers have retrieved and written a word where they're unsure of the correct spelling, they may use orthographic recognition to see if the word looks right. For example, smoke and smoke are both phonetically accurate, but only one's the correct spelling. So knowing which one is correct depends on orthographic knowledge. So that just kind of gives you an overview of kind of like how the pieces, work together. This is a car was in front of a Starbucks, and I thought that's pretty funny, it's a Lexus, and the person must have, dyslexia. Sometimes I forget how to spell a word, so I change the whole sentence to avoid using it. I think we've all been, guilty of that, but this is particularly a problem for students with weaknesses in orthography. So this little third grade boy, I thought, pretty cute, the first word there, he's trying to write chirp and he doesn't know. And he says, it needs a vowel. It needs a vowel. So, but again, that's a good step forward is he knows it needs a vowel. He just doesn't know, which one. So this was in a store. This is pretty funny. This item is reduced due to the misspelling of the word bird. So it was quite a bargain, these pots, but again, it, had to be somebody with a weakness, in orthography. So one recent study suggested that orthographic processing is another linguistic risk factor for dyslexia. Findings from a recent meta-analysis indicated individuals with dyslexia have a deficit in orthographic knowledge that's as large as that of phonological awareness and rapid automatized naming. So again, it's really good. We see more attention now, even in the research, being paid attention to orthographic, processing. Now, I've only seen, a couple examples, of this. This is a third grade student, she does total mirror writing and she actually spells pretty well, but, it is unusual. I was at a conference once, I was talking about this, and when I finished, a woman came up to me and she said, well, you ought to see what I can do. And so she took a pencils in both hands, pens in both hands. She wrote exactly at the same speed with both hands, one backwards, one forward. Said I can write more easily backward than forward. My brain allows me to do it. When I was little, I had reading and writing problems. Now as an adult, I only have trouble with speed and spelling. But, again, we had one college student who took all his notes writing backward. So, obviously it's something in the brain, some kind of, neurological difference. So, we have, again, phonology and orthography, the sounds of the language and the marks of a writing system. And we're really going to see that reading problems can be caused by problems in phonology or orthography, or in some cases, both. So a complex relationship exists between English phonology and orthography. Here we have your tie and my tie. And this was a t-shirt I saw in Florida. Is my tie on straight? I thought that's pretty cute. And then a friend of mine who was just in Arizona brought me this shirt. I don't know where he'd ever use that, but I thought, that's sort of an interesting orthography. I don't know, taco cat spelled backward, is taco cat. Anyway, I do have that t-shirt. So Dr. Airy's theory is relevant to what we're talking about. She says the pronunciation of words are the anchors for written words in memory. So mapping occurs when words are both decoded and encoded. Sight words are learned by forming the connections between the letters seen in the spelling words and the sounds that are already stored in memory. And the two most important phonological awareness abilities for mapping are blending and segmenting. So Dr. Kilpatrick explains that orthographic mapping is the process readers use to store written words for immediate, effortless retrieval. It's the means by which readers turn unfamiliar written words into familiar, instantaneously accessible sight words. So, we've got these three codes. So we've got the semantic, the meaning of cat. We've got the phonological at, and then we've got the orthographic cat. And these three codes contribute to the process of orthographic mapping. So what happens is we form the connections between the phonemes and the graphemes. So we've got a whole word like cat. It's then analyzed into phonemes, k, at. Those speech sounds are mapped to graphemes, cat, and then the word is recognized as a whole word. So typically developing readers only need to see a word a couple of times, 1 to 4 times to retain it. So the sight of the word triggers recognition, sound and meaning. And so once they've seen a word, several times, they recognize it as a complete word, as a sight word. So English is a hard language to read and spell. I think this, coffee cup kind of illustrates it. But yes, English can be weird. It can be understood through tough, thorough thought and though. It was funny, I was talking to a woman the other day, and she said her husband, who's 72, is definitely dyslexic. He was never diagnosed. But the other day he asked her, he said, well, how do you tell the difference between through and though? And she said, well, through has an R in it. And he said, oh. So, you're a 73-year-old, having trouble seeing the difference between those words. It's kind of interesting when you look at cartoons about dyslexia, they're usually always about orthography. This was in the Tucson paper, and it took me a minute to get it, but dyslexics are the leading cause of traffic jams at kitchen stores. Okay, so we've got right stop there. This one's easier to understand, why dyslexics have lower electric bills. And here we have a monkey, with good orthography. So instead of do not feed the animals, it's feed the animal donuts. So when you have a problem with orthography, it's very hard to copy from a board. It's hard to even copy from one side of the paper to the other side of the paper. Ben has a problem with orthography. And the teacher says, Ben, these words should be spelled correctly since they're on the page already. But for him to go from that side over to that side, is too far. He forgets what it looks like. So here's the accommodation for that. Wes Fumple had gotten downright lazy when it came to taking notes. So, how does orthography affect reading development? The child will have trouble remembering sight words. They continue to sound out words even after many exposures. They confuse words that are hard to get an image of, like of and for. They confuse similar looking letters and words. And they have a slow word perception and a slow reading rate. So, how does orthography affect spelling development? So we talked about how spelling involves phonology, orthography, and morphology, and knowledge of word meaning. But you first have to have knowledge of phonology before you get knowledge, of, orthography. And so, we look at the problems you'll see with phonology and how they differ from orthography. So phonology, they don't put the sounds in order. They add or omit sounds. They represent phonemes with the incorrect letters. They confuse voiced and unvoiced consonant pairs, confuse vowel sounds, all the things that Dr. Podhajski talked about. Orthography, they put all the sounds down, but they use the incorrect letters. You'll still see reversals of letters and even sometimes transpositions of words. They spell common high frequency words like they sound, not how they look. And they regularize the irregular element of words. And this is probably the most important one. So you'll see them spelling a word like they, T-H-A-Y, or said, S-E-D. So putting the sounds in order requires phonological processing, particularly segmentation. Recalling the visual elements of words requires orthographic processing. So this is critical for those letter sequences that you can't sound out, as well as mastery, of the irregular parts of words. So, we look at how orthography affects spelling development. Early on, often have difficulty learning how to form letters. Remember talking to one first grade teacher, she said, I spent 2 months trying to teach Tom how to make a T, and he forgets it. He'll know it, and then he forgets it. Reversals of letters and numbers past the age of 7 or after a year of exposure to the alphabet. Trouble copying, spelling words the way they sound, not the way they look. Spelling the same word inconsistently. Violating rules of English spelling. Often has poor spelling into adulthood, and will often see a discrepancy between their ability to spell words and the quality, of their ideas. I think this is a great example of this. Aaron is in 6th grade. His teacher wrote for him the topic, mystical creatures. But we look at this, hi, my name's Fred. I'm the most unique mystical creature in the planet. I can travel through time dimensions. I have the body of a gargoyle, the wings and tail of a dragon. Dimension I live in is called the land of mystical creatures. One day, me and my wife talked about doing some time traveling. We didn't know where we wanted to travel, so we looked at the maps we had. Here's when I heard Julie call out. What is it? I asked. She brought it over at Red Planet Earth. I never thought about it. I realized we'd never visited this planet, and that's when the trouble began. So you look at here the quality of his ideas, his vocabulary, and then you look at just simple high frequency words like some and we and where and when, read, so just, you can tell that he's a very, bright student with a very significant problem in orthography. So I'm just going to mention to you 2 standardized assessments that I've worked on, that get at orthography. So one's a test of silent word reading fluency. And what you have to do with this, it's a time test, and you have to put a slash between everywhere it becomes a new word in your time. And so you can imagine for a person with an orthography problem, they can't see the word boundaries quickly. And so this is sort of a very difficult task and has a very high correlation with other measures, of orthography. We are just finishing up the 2nd edition of the test of orthographic competence. It should be out in May. Now, there's also several informal ways you can look at orthographic, processing. One of the most common is exception word reading and spelling, homophone choice tasks, letter string choice, and really looking at classroom writing samples and how they do on spelling tests. So exception or irregular word reading. We've got our regular words, that conform to English spelling rules. We have some of our regular but ambiguous words. There's several possible spellings. And then we have our irregular words where there's one or more element of the word that's not predictable. So you can dictate some regular non-words, see if they can spell them. And then you can take some irregular words and just take out the irregular part and have them fill it in and see what they do. So here's just some examples of exception words, you could use for a reading task, or a spelling task. So other kinds of tasks that have been used are homophone choice tasks. Which is the correct spelling for the flower? Rose or rose? Which is related? Rose, flower, or flower? Letter string choice tasks. Circle the one that looks more like a real English word. And those are kind of interesting tasks because people who learn to read and spell quite easily quickly recognize, which one is a possible English combination. Also looking at how they do on spelling tests. Tyler's in 6th grade. You look at once, W-O-N-C-E, said, S-E-A-D. Now it was interesting because Tyler was really interested in boats in the ocean and islands. And so those are the words he spelled correctly because he spent so much time with them. But, we look at where and we look at who, H-O-W, people, etc. So you'll see a lot of problems, with these spelling words. So Matthew's in 5th grade. And I show Matthew the word they, and then I cover it up and I say, okay, Matthew, tell me when you're ready. I cover it up and he writes T-H-A-Y. And so I do this, with all these words. Look at once, he's just looked at it. I cover it up and he writes W-U-N-S. And so as you can see, it goes straight, straight to sounds. And so again, just problems with that visual orthographic image. I show him the word science up there. I say, tell me when you're ready to write this from memory. He's ready. I cover it up. He writes that. I show him again. He writes that. I show him again. He writes that. 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 Show him again. So finally I say, okay, Matthew, just go ahead and copy that. He looked up there 5 times in order to write science correctly. So it just shows you again, the extent of this difficulty with retrieving and storing orthographic images. Lots of times we can just look at writing samples from kids too and to see, as Blanche had mentioned, kind of exactly what they need in terms of help. Katie's in 5th grade, and again, we see this large discrepancy, between her ideation and her spelling. I dreamed about a snowy town. When I got out of the box, I was in a cabin. I looked outside, it was snowing. I made a lot of friends, and I had to come in the box. Later I woke, I climbed out in front of me. There was a tree of money. I took some of the money, I stuffed it in the box. I crawled in, I slept. Later I woke up, I was at home. As I opened the box, I heard something at the bottom of the box say, the time and imagination, box. I mean, great story, but we can tell by looking at this, she needs direct instruction and spelling rules. So she really needs to learn about when you drop the E, how to spell past tense, irregular past tense. And so she really needs direct instruction. So the biggest problem for people with orthography problems, obviously, is spelling. And, you have to kind of laugh. I mean, Bradley's in 3rd grade, and you can sense his, teachers, frustration. But please spell, words correctly. That's, as we know, not really going to help. So my good friend and colleague Irene Gonzalez just sent me this one last week, and so we don't want to count off for spelling if it's not a spelling test. So this is obviously a student with dyslexia in 6th grade, and she's getting marked off, because of her spelling mistakes on a grammar test. past and past participle. I had to think for a moment, what is a past participle? Oh boy. And so we don't want to ask students to edit their own work either, because, it'll just get worse. So he had today right, and, now it's wrong. This is Spence here again, and you just have to love some of his spellings, to be exact. Look at exact, E-G-Z-A-K-E-T. They've just recently discovered 2 new planets. So he's writing about, his planets. And he says at the bottom there, Jupiter is made of gas and maybe Venus. You gotta watch this last sentence. In the future, people, will live on Mars. And so again, you just see this, difficulty with spelling. Now, what's kind of interesting, when Spence is allowed to orally dictate what he wants to say, the quality of his expression and his ideas is way beyond, what he can do with written expression. And this story actually went on about four pages. He says, this is an amazing fact. I never knew this until 2nd grade. He's so smart. So here's Spence. I just listened to him talk for a minute.
We'll say this is what I'm writing. So I'm writing, this kid peeks over from me from the side. I kind of do this. So you can see how horrible my spelling was. My letters, they were huge. And I would look over at the other kids and I would see that their writing was very neat and their control. And I look at my handwriting, I kind of want to hide it. Spencer, in your handwriting, did you have the choice whether or not to use cursive? Did you always have to use cursive, or could you? When my printing is as bad as my cursive. But I feel comfortable. Yeah, I feel more comfortable with printing. I can read it better too. So multiplication was extremely hard for me. Just like spelling, I felt, what is this going to? Do you have it now? What? Multiplication, do you understand it now? Yes, I have a better understanding of it. And I'll show you how to do it. It's my 5 backwards after that. This way, why do you think that is? Probably just, again, my handwriting errors. Or the stopping letters. It's just a little hard to remember which way to put it. But then see, at first they thought that it was only a physical problem. Nothing like what it is, really. What is it? It's learning. I can't spell, I can't write right. I'd make a good doctor.
Anyway, you can see how clever he is, and just the discrepancy between his oral language, and his spelling ability. So just kind of use the last part of this. Talk a little bit about, what are the accommodations, modifications, instructional strategies that can be helpful when students have orthography problems. So with reading combination, these kids will often need extended time, shorter assignments, reading for a specific amount of time, not a certain number of pages. So reading for 20 minutes or reading for a half an hour, pairing them to read with another student so they read together. In terms of spelling tests, working on phonetically regular words, words that share a pattern. So teaching words like could, should, would as a group together because they share that pattern. Shorter word lists, daily testing instead of weekly testing, and giving partial credit on spelling tests. So giving some credit when they've got part of the word correct, so that it's just not, all, right or wrong. I remember Matthew, when he's in 5th grade, the teacher said to him, on the 20-word spelling test, Matthew, I'm just going to have you do 5 words. And he's like, no, He said, I want to do 20 like everybody else. She said, okay, Matthew, ahead of time, we'll agree on what the 5 words are, but you take all 20 like everyone else. And he goes, yeah, okay, that's a good deal. As we all know, kids don't like to feel that they're doing something different or sort of, be singled out. So, we can talk to kids about, the English words are a little bit like a traffic light. We've got our green words, they're phonically regular. If you listen to them carefully, you'll spell them right. We have our yellow words, they're irregular, but they're frequent patterns. We've got our red words, slam on your brakes, you got to memorize the irregular part, of these words. Much of the instruction that has worked and been effective with kids with orthography problem, really kind of multi-sensory or multi-modal, activities. And so that, tracing is evolved, and tracing seems to help. Again, to trace a word, you've got to look at the whole thing. So it helps with attention. It helps with memory, helps with sound symbol associations because you're making the sounds as you're tracing the letter. And, it can also help with handwriting. So why tracing is effective? It requires the student to pay attention, look at each letter, reinforces the connections between the phonemes and the graphemes. And the student has to write the word from memory, not copy. So typically after you have them trace the word X amount of times, then they turn it over and they write the word from memory. So essentially what you're doing is helping them learn how to visualize. And so they trace it, turn it over, write it from memory, without looking. So many of the remedial spelling interventions really are sort of based on the work of, Dr. Grace Fernald. But so this is an example. You select a word, write it on a card. You pronounce the word, you have the student look at the word, say the word. You have the student pronounce the word while tracing it as many times as needed until he or she can write the word from memory. You have the student write the word correctly 3 times from memory, then file it in a word bank. Review the word periodically to ensure the student can read and spell the word, with ease. From the benchmark school, these talk to yourself charts, can be helpful where, you're really kind of analyzing words in depth. And this is easier to follow a little bit. We have an example in there. So the word is right. When I stretch the word, I hear 3 sounds. I, t. There's 5 letters because it takes IGH to represent the I sound. The spelling pattern is I. This is what I know about the vowel. The vowel is the only vowel in the word. It says its own name. Another word I know with the same vowel sound is right. Other words that share this same spelling pattern are light, night, might, tight, sight, plight, fight, flight, and fright. And this is a perfect spelling list for a student, with dyslexia to master, a pattern. So introduce only a few words at a time, provide frequent review, provide a personal list for a student, or have the word posted on a word wall. But I think what's better when you see that there's certain words that are misspelling, like high frequency words, like what and want and they said, just have a list that they have right there on their desk or in a journal that they can check and hold them responsible for spelling those words correctly. And as I mentioned, teaching related spelling patterns in families whenever possible so that they see the pattern. With some kids, you gotta actually use some mnemonics to help them remember like these hard patterns, like, O-U-L-D. So when Ben was in 5th grade, he was spelling could, C-U-D, would, W-U-D, should, S-H-U-D. Anyway, we said, look at when you spell those words, you gotta say, oh, you little dog. So it was kind of funny. The rest of the year, as he's writing these words, you see him kind of whispering in his breath, oh, you little dog. But he never misspelled those words again. So sometimes mnemonics can help. I think this is a nice mnemonics, for because big elephants can always understand small elephants, and again, you just think if you have an orthography problem, how difficult that word is to spell. So irregular word instruction, these are the most difficult words for our students with orthography problems. So introduce one exception word, cheater word, red flag word, trickster word, every several lessons. Highlight or color code the irregular element. Have the students spell the word letter by letter, say the word. Gradually increase the rate to several new words each day. Keep it in a word box and provide systematic, review of the word. So one easy thing to do is, you've got a word like said. So make the letters bigger, draw a heart around that part, and say, this is the part you have to memorize by heart. You don't have to memorize the S and the D, you can hear them. And so I think it's better if you say the sounds of the regular letters, and then the letter names of the irregular part. So again, and then you just circle, the irregular part. There's only a part, of the word that's irregular. So as I mentioned to you too, you can also use a spelling flow list where you do daily testing of a few words. Keep it on the list until the word's spelled correctly, 3 days in a row. Review it weekly. If it's incorrect, put it back on the list. I'd select words from a student's writing that they're misspelling, or you could use, a high frequency word list and work on those words. But, essentially just what you do with this, you just do daily testing of a few words till they're mastered, then put them in a box, check them a week later. If they're incorrect, then it goes back on the list again. And then you can even share, with next year's teacher, the list of words, that were mastered for the student, to start with those words. So, principles of spelling instruction. We want to teach spelling rules as needed. Select words that are at the instructional level for the student. They're not too difficult. Make sure they master high frequency words. Provide practice and review, multisensory techniques when needed. Have students write words from memory, not copy. It's funny, a couple of months ago, I was talking to a superintendent and, we were just talking about the importance of spelling, that people really will judge you about your spelling your entire life. And that the public really associates poor spelling, with limited education. And so he was just kind of laughing, his name was Brian. He said, I was just kind of laughing about it. He said, I had an application for a job the other day and it said, Dear Brain. And he said, I threw it out right away, but again, obviously somebody, with an orthography problem. So we do want to help people become good as, good spellers. I also always tell kids who have spelling difficulties, it's important to get nice handwriting, because if you get nice handwriting, people aren't as concerned about your spelling for some reason, This is a middle school student. I always wanted to be an orthodontist. I'll put the braces on the patients. I'll check on how their braces are doing. Finally, I'll get to take the braces off. But again, you can see he's indenting, he's writing, neatly. This student is in 5th grade. I'll have you just, listen to him read his little story.
A man went to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist says, "What's your problem?" The man says, "My wife thinks she's a chicken." The psychiatrist says, "How long has she had this problem?" The man says, "For 2 years." The psychiatrist says, "For 2 years? Why didn't you do anything about it?" The man says, "Because we needed the eggs."
So, again, you can see his, difficulties with spelling, but anybody who looks at this knows he's really trying hard and, really working hard. So it pays to get nice handwriting and, keyboarding skill. So a couple, other things you can do, working on fluency, you can do rapid word, recognition charts. So you have a chart composed of 5 rows, 6 irregular words, time how quickly the student reads the chart, count and record the number of words, read correctly. So you again take words that are regular, you time how fast they can read it, have them do it, several days till they get very fluent and read these words, very quickly. So with many of the fluency methods, you read as you're listening to the same material. And so you might be listening to a book on a recording on a CD. You keep your finger down as you're following along. It's nice because you can use high interest materials, and you can actually use material at the instructional or sometimes even the frustration level, if they'll follow along. So one of the methods that has the most research for building fluency is repeated readings. So it's designed for children who read slowly, but they have adequate word recognition. So choose a passage, 5 to 100 words, slightly above the student's reading level. Have the student read the same passage several times. Seems that 4 to 5 to 6 times is best. Time the reading, count the number, of errors, record the reading time and the number of words pronounced incorrectly. And then you just make a chart, use 2 different colored pencil, one for time and, one for errors, or you can make time a circle or X or square for errors or, whatever. I think the reason this method does help build fluency is by the 4th or 5th reading, the student sounds like they're a really good reader. And so they start hearing what I sound like when I'm fluent. And so I think it's just kind of reinforcing. They're like, I can be a good reader. And this is what I sound like, when I am a good reader. So it's kind of funny sometimes when you're out in the world, you do see, things like this, and you think, oh boy, somebody must have been drinking when they put that sign up, but you look at this one, it's like, oh, you gotta be kidding. I wonder how long that stayed like that. But, again, we have lots of people that have, difficulty, with orthography. So, also just want to say, a minute about, the importance of well-trained and understanding teachers. The most important part of a child's, education, is their teacher. So Tisha is in 3rd grade and her teacher, understands she has dyslexia. Look at number 4 there. I love it. Unusual, traveler, treasure, beagle, faucet, like 9, faucet. Okay. So, but her teacher puts +2, good. On Wednesday, let's work on this together. And so again, she's going to keep trying and keep working. And so even just something as simple as putting the number right on a spelling test instead of the number wrong can be reinforcing to students. And again, she'll keep working because, her teacher gives her a happy face and says, it's good. This was good. Peter says, Miss O, I'm sorry I called you an old goat today. You've really helped me with my writing this year. Your friend, Peter. So the kids, really do, appreciate, what we do and, how we help them. So this was something I saw a while ago, but, teachers, few people knew, but that tiny pocket on your jeans is for your salary. But I saw this t-shirt yesterday and I thought, okay, this is the truth. Teachers don't teach for the income, teachers teach for the outcome. And that, that's why, we all teach. So, I want to thank Sinclair and Boon Philanthropy, for all you do, for helping students, for making sure that, teachers have access to the knowledge they need, for teaching reading. And so thank you for, oh, I said boom, I'm sorry. That's funny. There is an there's an orthography problem right there. Boom philanthropy. It's Boon, sorry. Oh my gosh. So, congratulations, Ms. Roberts, you changed my life. We really do change the lives of kids, when we help them learn to read and spell. So I really thank you for all that you do and all the ways that you help students. And so this is the end of orthography. And so now I think we can take some time to see if you have any questions you would like to talk about with Dr. Podhajski.
Sure. This is Amy. I'm going to actually, I'm monitoring the questions. So I have a few in here. Let's see, we had some about, Blanche, you mentioned how the skills that you were talking about were so critical. But do you have any recommendations for how much time and how frequently you would spend time on those skills?
Great question. And just before I get to the question, I do have to do a correction on my my segmentation of college. And thank you to all the alert people that were listening to me so well. It's a 2-syllable word, and I swallowed the schwa, as many people would. It's k-a-o-a-j. It's 5 sounds. Excellent. The schwa is in the 2nd syllable. Okay, that was one thing. And another thing was mention the program Phoneme Grapheme Mapping by Catherine Grace. I think it just got a new publisher. I think it's now with ProEd. I'm not sure, but if you don't think so, Nancy, I don't know. It's Phoneme Grapheme Mapping, and it's a wonderful, again, way to help children make those sound letter associations. And she's got a lovely inventory of sound patterns. It's a really great reading. Thank you, Kathy Grace. Or someone else who's named Grace in any event. In terms of how much time you would spend, I think, again, we're looking at significance of the issue. Are we talking about regular classroom instruction? Are we talking at kindergarten or 1st grade levels? And again, depending on a 15-minute to 20-minute activity embedded within teaching reading and sounds. And, another point I really wanted to make was this whole artificial dichotomy that's always accentuated in our business about the phonics people versus the literature people. I don't think any of us who love to teach and want to help children learn to read would say that we don't do both. We want to teach children how the language is constructed and its sound symbol composition. And if you aren't doing it perhaps through synthetic phonics, sometimes it's because you haven't been taught yourself in terms of what a synthetic phonics program is and how it differs from an analytic phonics program. So analytic phonics is usually when you're using word families. And again, there's a place for both, but the research is unequivocally clear that synthetic phonics is the preferred method if we want to help children become fluent readers in decoding print. Now, in terms of time, again, we're talking children who have dyslexia, children who have significant reading issues, even if they're curriculum casualties, are going to need a bigger block of time and on a more regular basis. And that's when it's nice to have 20 to 30 minutes a day. But Nancy, would you want to leap in on that one in terms of time?
No, I agree. Yeah.
Okay. Terrific.
There was another question, I think, that relates to that. And that's, can students be considered dyslexic if there's just a weakness in orthography?
The thing is, it's like how severe is that weakness? And you've got to ask, questions about how old they are, how much print exposure have they had? Because when we all start learning the language, we have orthography problems because we don't know what letters go together. And so you have to ask a lot of, questions. Is there any family history of dyslexia? And so, is the student an English learner? I mean, so you have to ask a lot of questions and, how severe is the weakness? So it's not easy to answer without knowing more, about the student, but, it's definitely something to address, not necessarily saying they have dyslexia, but to address and help them, with that weakness. Blanche, do you want to add in?
No, I also think response to instruction is a really good vehicle for helping make that differential. Some of these children have really never been taught in a way that works for them. And I just thought some of your strategies with the heart underscoring for irregular patterns in words is a wonderful one. But if a child has that kind of orthographic memory difficulty, you're going to see the response to instruction taking longer than it would for other children who just need that very wonderful, strategy.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
There was a question about, are there any types of materials that you would recommend for phonemic awareness training for 5th grader or older students?
Okay, well, the program I mentioned earlier, phoneme graphing mapping, can be used at all ages. And again, it's not in any way an immature presentation. But again, it's all about the teacher, and it's not what you use, but who's using it and why. And if we're looking at sound symbol relationships and wanting to teach them, if you're trained in a synthetic phonics approach, be it Wilson or Orton Gillingham or whatever, but if you're using something like a phoneme graphing mapping beforehand, some of the programs have programs within them that do phonemic awareness, but others will, you'll need to do it independently. Phoneme graphing mapping is a good one. Nancy, do you know others?
Not real. I mean, there's obviously so many for 1st and 2nd grade, but
Right.
Yeah, I think phoneme graphing and mapping would be perfect.
Where you'd start.
Yeah.
And there was a question about what role does phonological awareness play in dyslexia?
Well, dyslexia is a deficit in the phonological processing of language. It's an inability to understand the sound symbol relationships of our English language system. So there's obviously a visual component to it, which makes remembering sight words especially hard. But these are, again, children who are bright. They're children who need structure and a system that makes sense, that goes from simple to complex, that can be repetitive and redundant so that they have opportunities to remember over time, and so that they have different opportunities to apply it in different settings, like within sentences, within stories. And again, the 3 times kind of rule is a good one. I hope that answered the question.
And let me kind of add in too, though, in addition to phonological awareness, we also want to think about orthographic, processing. We also want to think about rapid automatized naming. We want to think about other linguistic risk factors than just phonological awareness. Dr. Bruce Pennington said if we only look at phonological awareness as being the correlate or cause, of dyslexia, that we'll miss about half the cases. And so we really do have to have a broader perspective on what contributes to reading difficulties.
Great, thank you. There was also a question about should the letters be introduced when students are segmenting and blending sounds early on and then beyond?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of that, Amy. Could you say that again, please?
Yeah, sure. Yep, there was a question about should letters be introduced when students are just learning to segment and blend sounds in preschool and then beyond? Like, when might you make the switch to showing letters?
Okay, that's really a very important question, because again, over and over again, the literature is telling us that linking letters to sounds is critical. And the sooner we can do that, the better. And in terms of introducing the alphabet, we're doing that in kindergarten and in first grade. But in terms of a sequential pattern, we'd want to start with the segmentation of sounds in spoken language using blocks, chips, something nonverbal. And then as the child begins to understand that process, it's nice to be able to push the letter underneath it for simple words. And again, it should always be within a simple to complex structure. So we're not introducing digraphs and vowel diphthongs at the beginning. We're selecting our reading vocabulary so that it is single words, consonant, vowel, consonant, consonant, vowel, consonant, E, according to a, again, systematic sequence. Nancy, you want to add to that?
No.
Let's see. Thank you. I think there's also a question about, this goes, I guess, to Nancy, thinking about the peer editing. There were a couple of questions with that. So you had mentioned not recommending to edit your own work, but what are your thoughts about peer editing?
You know, a little bit, you know, depends on the relationship of the two students. And if the editor is a much better speller, etc., that can be helpful as long as the two students work together well, you know, as a team, and both feel, you know, good about the relationship. You know, that can be very helpful. If their skill level is about the same, it's not often very effective because they're both sitting there thinking, well, how do you spell beautiful? And so they change it to Buttyfull together. You know, that's a better spelling than what we have. And so, you know, it's just, again, the one skill has to be a little bit higher, the editor's skill has to be a little bit higher, and that the relationship has to be, you know, supportive. Blanche, you want to add in? No.
That's good.
How about how does maybe a kindergarten student's orthographic knowledge influence their phonemic awareness?
How does the orthographic knowledge influence their phonemic awareness? I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but I think they're trying to say if a child comes to kindergarten with a certain number of sight words and has sort of memorized them, like most children come to kindergarten knowing how to spell their names. Okay, they know how to spell their names. They might be able to spell another number of high frequency words, but most of those words are phonetically irregular. The, boy, girl. But a word like girl, once you get to the point of knowing our combination vowels, you can also decode it. So I think it would be no different than a child at any grade who is influenced by memorization, who's trying to memorize every word in the English language, and now needing to understand that there is a system, as complicated as it sometimes may feel, but on which our English language is based. That we have a certain number of vowels, a certain number of consonants, and then consonant combinations and diphthongs and all of those higher order skills that we can teach you, that we can help you so that you can independently learn how to decode and encode.
You know, it's kind of interesting because I was talking to a friend the other day, and she was saying her kindergarten student daughter, has to memorize 100 sight words. Okay, so again, starting with the orthography instead of the phonology, we talked about phonology precedes orthography. And so then you wonder, what is the child going to do with that? So they learn these sight words. Are they going to intuit the phonological system? Are they going to learn how to blend and segment by memorizing, words like with the configuration and a box around them? It just doesn't seem to be very effective teaching in terms of, what we know. We want to start with the phonology, map it to the orthography, so that they learn how to blend and segment and develop a sight vocabulary that way, not through memorization of 100 words.
Even a progression from sight words to analytic phonics or word family approaches where you can start manipulating the onset and the vowel to show children the patterns in words, and then going to the synthetic phonics if people feel like kindergarten is too early a time to get into synthetic phonics. But I don't think so, personally. You can always do the word of the, everybody's doing the letter of the week, the sound of the week. You just change letter to sound. It becomes the sound of the week.
There's a question, Nancy says that someone has commented, they're glad to see that you have some orthographic assessments available. And the question is, can a reading specialist or a special education teacher administer this test, or does it need a higher level of training?
No, absolutely. I mean, so both those tests, reading teachers, classroom teachers, they're, yeah, it's not a high level. You need to administer those tests. No.
Okay, then there was another question about, does the repeated tracing help with letter reversals, and is there anything else that might be helpful?
I think the repeated tracing, does help. We separate instruction. We don't teach B and D together. I mean, there's, depending what letters they're reversing, there's all these little tricks you can do, like bed with your B and D with the front of the bed and the end of the bed. It's just, I haven't to sit there and think, okay, it's a B, but, using some kind of mnemonics to help them, with the B, D reversals. Also handwriting, teaching the formation of the letters in a different formation. So the D starts like an A, goes up and comes down. The B goes down and comes up around. That can help too when they're actually formed in a different way.
Okay, thank you. I think there's also another question about, is there a particular age where you can identify orthographic processing weaknesses, and what might some of the earliest symptoms be?
So some of the earliest symptoms are they have trouble learning letters and they don't remember them. And the kindergarten teacher, just is having as I mentioned to you, that boy, Tom, I've been working for months trying to teach him to write and know the letter, T. So just starts out with a lot of trouble remembering letter forms. But as we also talked about, phonology precedes orthography. So typically orthography problems aren't identified till late first, early second grade, usually. But I think we can look at things like such difficulty learning letters, letter names. There's a family history of dyslexia. And, frustration is starting. And again, hopefully, as Blanche mentioned, so a response intervention program would provide that student, with appropriate instruction, right at the beginning. But usually, orthography problems aren't identified till late first, second grade. But I think you can sure get some clues early on when they're having trouble learning letter forms.
All right. Whoops. There were some questions that came in about English language learners, just kind of some general questions. I don't know if you all have any recommendations or resources that you use, but there were questions about how to assess or address orthographic skills for English language learners, or phonemic awareness skills as well, kind of both.
And again, we're going to be sending out follow-up, I guess, questions, because I didn't put it in my handout, and I apologize. The core teaching reading, I think it's system or structure, I can't remember, source book. The source book really addresses the phonemes that are challenging for ELL learners. And that might be something you'd be interested in at least perusing. The sequence for teaching, I think, is very much the same, except we have to remember one of the questions we received before the webinar began was from Africa, and the dialect that the children were being taught was very faceted in terms of its phonology, and the numbers of vowel sounds and the numbers of consonant sounds was much greater. But in an English language system, with that comparison, it would be kind of a treat to look at our 6 vowel representations by letters, even though there are 15 to 18 vowel sounds. So it's just making sense out of that in a systematic, structured way.
You know, and then also thinking about the transparency of the language. So we've got languages with shallow orthographies where there's a pretty good match between the phonemes and the graphemes. And then we've got languages with deeper orthographies like French and English where there's so much to consider. And so with languages like Spanish and things like that, there's a much more consistent mapping than there is English. And so lots of times those kids do okay with accuracy, but end up with fluency, you know, issues. And so we also kind of have to think about what's the characteristics, you know, of the person's language, you know. If it's a language with high regularity, like German and Finnish and things like that, it's much easier to teach the sound simple connections because they're more simplistic, you know, than English. So you've got to kind of ask yourself, what language is their first language?
All right, thank you. It looks like there's a question that just came in about, are there any adjustments to a general structured literacy approach for students with IQs that range in the 60s to 70 range?
I don't know of any that are specifically targeted to that population. I would think, again, a creative teacher might be able to, again, reduce the amount of information that's presented in any good phonics scope and sequence. Look at Recipe for Reading, look at, you know, Wilson, whatever, and attach the meaning to it. So we're doing smaller amounts of information with meaning linked as much as possible to real words, real concepts that the child is familiar with. But do you know any programs that are specifically designed for that population, Nancy?
No, but you know, it's funny. I was thinking about a student, John, I worked with many years ago who had an intellectual impairment, and they told me he'd never learn to read. And well, someone tells me someone's not going to learn to read, I'm going to make sure they learn to read. But anyway, I did teach him how to decode, and he learned to decode. He learned to crack the code, but his comprehension was the problem. Then it's like he couldn't understand what he was reading, and I thought, oh, I've created such a difference here between, you know, his decoding skill and his comprehension. And so really the attention needed to be directed then to vocabulary and language development, because he did learn to crack the code.
All right, well, it looks like I hope that we did a good job answering all these questions that came in. Thank you so much, Blanche and Nancy. And I'm going to pass it back over to Sinclair. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy and Blanche and Nancy, for such a thoughtful webinar, double webinar. We're incredibly grateful at Boon. It's hard to start any better than with Blanche and Nancy. It's kind of like the all-star beginning. It's going to be downhill from here. So we're very pleased and excited, and we hope all the participants enjoyed it. It'll be recorded. It's been recorded, and it'll be available through our website. So thank you again for all the support at the Stern Center for Learning and Language in Burlington, Vermont, which is just an extraordinary nonprofit that has benefited so many people. It's an honor to work with them. And they were really very skillful in helping us with this first webinar. We couldn't have done it without them. So take care all, stay safe, and we hope you'll join us for our next webinar. Take care.